So, you're interested in the Sega Game Gear, but you're kind of hesitant in buying one in 2021. Well, I'm here to give you a full buyer's guide of the one and only Sega Game Gear. Let's get into it. So, before we even get to the games, let's talk about the system itself. The Sega Game Gear came out in 1990 in Japan and late 1991 in the US. It was made to compete for the Nintendo Game Boy and the Atari Lynx. The Sega Game Gear contains a full backlit screen, and unlike the Game Boy that was in black and white or green screen or whatever, the Game Gear was colored, just like the Atari Lynx. Now, most of the hardware that's on the Sega Game Gear is actually the same hardware that will be in the Sega Master System. So essentially, it's a portable Master System. So much so that they even made an accessory where you could play Sega Master System games on the Sega Game Gear. The only difference between Game Gear games and Master System games is that the screen resolution is different and the Game Gear displays more colors. It even displays more colors than the Sega Genesis. Now, there are some things to know about getting a Sega Game Gear nowadays. For one, is that buying an old, used Game Gear is a little bit risky, because many of these Game Gears are breaking down, and the reason for that is the capacitors that are inside of them. They tend to go down very easily, and if you have no sound or your screen is all messed up, that's the reason. So I highly recommend getting a Game Gear recap. It's going to be a lot more money, but it's definitely worth it. Another issue is that the screen hasn't really aged all that well. Although you can still see it, there is a little bit of a lot of ghosting on it. So another recommendation is getting a different screen for it. So it may be more money, but I would say get a new screen. Now, probably get into the most infamous aspect of the Sega Game Gear is that it takes up to 6 AA batteries, as you can see right here. And back then, you would only get about 3 to 4 hours of gameplay footage, So, in order to at least fix this remedy, you would need really good batteries, or use the same AC adapter that the Sega Genesis Model 2 would have. So that way you could play it for as long as you want. Now, modern batteries tend to tackle the Game Gear much better, and you can get 6 hours of battery life on it. I mean, I got a good amount of battery life from these Alcon batteries. So that's something to really note about, is that the battery life is a little bit weak. But nowadays, with modern batteries, you can get more out of it. But I recommend using a power adapter if you want to get more of your Game Gear playtime. Alright, so now let's talk about the games, because this is the most important aspect of the Game Gear or any system, is the games. And I'm happy to announce the Game Gear has plenty of great games. So, of course, you would know the Sonic games. So here we have Sonic the Hedgehog. This is an 8-bit version of Sonic the Hedgehog. But, although this is a pretty decent game, it comes nowhere close to these two Sonic games. Sonic Chaos and Sonic Triple Trouble. These are two very well-made Sonic games on the Sega Game Gear, with great music, great gameplay. They're a lot of fun to play, and I highly recommend getting both games. Triple Trouble is actually a Game Gear exclusive, so highly recommend both games. So, however, though, it doesn't stop here, because now we get to one of the most priciest Game Gear games that's also a Sonic game, but it's one that I highly recommend. Tails Adventure for the Game Gear. This came out late in the Game Gear's life, about 95 or so, but it's a very well-made adventure game. It's a different type of Sonic game. It's not your typical running through loops and things like that. It's an adventure game, and it's a really good one. Great platforming, great music. Tails is so cute in this game. It's a wonderful game by Sega. Highly recommend Tails' Adventure. There are some good Batman games on the Game Gear, but one of the best ones is Batman Returns on the Game Gear. This game plays just like Shinobi on the Game Gear, and the reason for that is the people that worked on Shinobi did Batman Returns. Yuzo Koshiro even did the music for this game, and it's very well made. It's a great game. You can choose between different levels of a certain stage to add more replay value. This is a really good game, and it's way better than the Genesis one. So this one, very common game. Highly recommend Batman Returns. There are some really good Disney games on the Game Gear, such as Legend of Illusion starring Mickey Mouse. This is a really good game. Very short and easy though, but still a good game. It also had Land of Illusion, which I don't own unfortunately, and this one Donald Duck game called Lucky Dime Caper or something like that. But instead I have Deep Duck Trouble starring Donald Duck, and this is a really good game by Disney Interactive. Very good game, plays very well in the Game Gear, looks great, very fun platforming game. However though, one game you may be surprised is different on the Game Gear. You would think it's like a Genesis, you know, the same as the Genesis version, but it's very different. Aladdin for the Game Gear. This game kind of plays like a combination of the Super Nintendo and Genesis version. What I mean by that is it kind of has the Genesis presentation, but also has the Super Nintendo gameplay where it's kind of like Prince of Persia in a way. But this is a very good game, but it is very short though. But it's a very common Sega Game Gear game, so this is one I recommend picking it up. Now the Game Gear had plenty of shmups if you're into shmup games, but unfortunately a lot of them were only released in Japan. We only ended up getting just a few, and here are the two that I recommend. Aerial Assault, which is a pretty basic shmup that you're basically an airplane, and it's a really solid game. It plays very well. However though, Halley Wars on the Game Gear is a very good shmup game. It's a little bit different because not only do you have to kill all the enemies, you have to make sure that their bullets are not hitting the planet Earth. If the Earth takes too much damage, the game is over. So you gotta be very careful making sure that they don't hit Earth. But this is a really good game with a great soundtrack. This is a very well-made game for the Sega Game Gear. Now, if you're having trouble finding Ristar in the Genesis, then I recommend checking out Ristar in the Game Gear. This is a little bit different than the Genesis version, but it has most of the aspects of the Genesis version. And it plays very, very well in the Game Gear. Very colorful, great music. So if you're having trouble finding the Genesis version, I recommend trying out the Game Gear version. It's a lot cheaper too. So the Genesis version costs about $50, it's only about $20. Now you may not be into Power Rangers, but believe it or not, these are two really good fighting games for the system. And we have Power Rangers and Power Rangers the movie. These are two really fun and simple pick up and play type of beat 'em up / fighting games. And they're very good on the Game Gear. They play very well and have some really good music. So even if you're not a Power Rangers fan, I recommend picking these two games up. They're very cheap too. They're some of the most common games on the Game Gear. So I recommend both Power Ranger games. Now, if you're a Ren and Stimpy fan, there's actually a Ren and Stimpy game. Ren and Stimpy Quest for the Shaven Yak for the Game Gear. And this is a really good Ren and Stimpy game, and arguably one of the best Ren and Stimpy game of the 16-bit era. It's a really nice platformer. Can be a little bit challenging at times, but if you're a Ren and Stimpy fan, I really recommend checking this one out. You're not going to regret it. It's a good one, and it's very cheap. Now, a similar situation to Aladdin. You would think that this Game Gear version will be the same as the Genesis version, but it's actually much different. And we have Jurassic Park on the Game Gear. There's also Lost World Jurassic Park, which is also really good, but it's a little bit more pricey. But this game is a lot more common. It's basically a run and gun game. There's also a mini game where you're driving the car, which is really fun. It's a really solid game on the Game Gear. One I highly recommend checking out. It's a very fun game. Last but not least, we have two more Sega games. We have Super Columns, which Columns came out bundled with the Game Gear, and it was an okay puzzle game, but I like Super Columns more because there's actually a story mode with this game. So I really recommend checking out Super Columns for that one reason, that there's actually a story mode. And last but not least, we have Shining Force, the Sword of Haja. Now, one bummer thing about this game, it's actually the second Shining Force game of the Game Gear. 1 and 3 never came out in the US unless you had Shining Force CD, which is a remake of 1 and 2. So 3 never saw the US release. But this is still a very well-made game for the Sega Game Gear, and I think one of the best that the system has to offer. It's a very good tactical RPG, very fun. The only issue is that beware of Freeze 3. It's a spell that does a lot of damage, and it was because of a mistake that they made in the translation, where it was supposed to only do 20 damage, it instead does 40 damage, so be very, very careful. Now, there are a few multiplats I would recommend, such as Streets of Rage 2 and Dynamite Headdy. They might not be as the Genesis version, but they're still pretty good. Also, we have Mortal Kombat 1 and Mortal Kombat 2. I recommend Mortal Kombat 2 more because it plays really well on the Game Gear, but one thing I will say about these two games is that they look amazing for the Sega Game Gear. Both look fantastic on the Game Gear. Even to this day, they still look good. Even though it's an 8-bit handheld, they still look really good. NBA Jam Tournament Edition and Primal Rage. Primal Rage is another one that's very, very graphically impressive on the Game Gear, so check those two out. And last but not least, Terminator 2, the arcade game. I actually really have a lot of fun with this version. It's nowhere near as frustrating as the Genesis or Super Nintendo version. I really like this one. It's actually kind of fascinating to see that this version is more colorful than the Genesis version. So this one is a really solid port of Terminator 2. Now, there are some Game Gear games I'm missing, so here are some really good games that I don't own. The Shinobi games, Dragon Crystal, I think that's what's called, Psychic World, Land of Illusion starring Mickey Mouse, Fatal Fury Special, but it's very expensive, same with Mega Man, Wonder Boy, and Devilish. And a cautious recommend of Axe Battler. It's not really all that good, but maybe you'll like it. Now comes to the question, should you buy a Sega Game Gear in 2021? And the answer is yes. Now you can be lucky and find a used Game Gear working very well, but a lot of times you might be able to get a Game Gear recap. But if you do that, it's awesome, because you don't have to worry about capacitors, the screen will look better, and also the battery life will be much better. Especially if you get a new screen. Now, there is the Majesco version of the Game Gear, and that version of the Game Gear actually has a better screen and an improved battery life. And the capacitors don't go out as often as other Game Gears. So, if you see the Majesco Game Gear, I would recommend checking that one out, because that one can last much longer than a normal Game Gear. So even though it may be hesitant to buy a Game Gear, I still recommend it. It's a great handheld. Just didn't get the third party support that it got with the Game Boy had, but it's still a great system with its own unique library of games made by Sega and other companies. So I highly recommend checking out the Game Gear. You won't regret it. Well, that's my buyer's guide video. I hope you guys enjoy it. I'll catch you guys later. Peace.